What's up, everybody, and welcome to First Round Frenzy. Cole Noble, Matt Laguza here, and we continue our path to the draft here with our positional rankings as we get closer and closer to the draft and the NFL Combine just in 2 weeks. The positional groups were announced. The most defensive linemen I think we've ever had. It was 41 names, I believe, invited. So this is a very, very deep class. Today we're doing our top 10 interior defensive linemen. It's a good and deep group. So, Cole, welcome. And, what do you think of this class as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, last year we had 20 something go to the combine, and we thought that was a lot, and especially how many we saw go early in the draft. And there's going to be a lot of these interior guys, and I think the guys we talked about the last episode as well on the
Yep.
edge that go in the top 100. I mean, we could see the majority of those 40 going to the combine next week, being in there in that top 100 group. So there's a lot of talent at both positions and a lot of teams like we just saw the Eagles show how important having a strong and deep defensive line can be. So there's going to be a lot of interest from other teams looking to replicate that this year.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of teams that get very happy with the players they get. I know for me, the top guys are very, very good. And then my 7 to 10, it was very hard to narrow down because there are a lot of players that could kind of be in that. There could be a lot of guys in that second, third tier of players at this position. So, Cole, let's get it started here. Who is your number 10 interior defensive lineman?
All right, number 10, I'm going to go with Joshua Farmer out of Florida State. We just saw two Florida State guys go last year, and Brendan Fisk and Jared Verse. Both of them finished as Defensive Rookie of the Year finalists. We know how strong this defensive line can be for the Seminoles. He's a guy, he's versatile. I think you can use him as a rotational guy in a three tech or a four tech, and what you can do with him in different positions. I think he's very bulky, a really strong, stout defensive tackle that, yeah, again, you can use at either one of those defensive schemes. And I think for him, the key trait's being an every down player.
Yep.
That's important for some teams. Some like to, rotate their defensive lines, but some like guys that you can just put in, you just leave him in first, second, and third down and get off the field. So I think that's good for him. Fitting with certain schemes, and then his pursuit is really good and pops off on the tape as well. And I think the only downside to him has been play recognition, especially with different run schemes and designs, and trying to get a jump on those as something you can work on.
Yeah. And I'm not going to add too much because he's also my number 10 player
Nice.
in this class. Pretty much everything you said. I mean, he's got good pursuit. He's got a good frame. He's a powerful rusher. I think occasionally he can struggle with shedding tackles on some of the more experienced offensive linemen. But other than that, he's really high potential player. I know Mel Kiper had him pretty high on his rankings when his first big board came out. I believe a top 5 or 6 player at the position for him. So some people have him a lot higher. But he's really solid player and very good pass rusher. So excited to see what he can do. Cole, who is your number 9?
My number 9, I'm gonna go with Savion Jones. This is a guy I could have mentioned last week, because he mainly played on the edge at LSU throughout his college career, but I thought he struggled in the backfield a lot. Looking at his tape, shiftier running backs, he had issues bringing them down and getting beat, and especially mobile quarterbacks. So I think his best bet's trying to be a like skinny, smaller style defensive tackle. Move a little bit inside. You're not going to get beat and exposed on the outside, which would be good for his game. And he looked really good there. They put him there at the Senior Bowl weekend, then, gave him an opportunity to show what he can do, playing, inside as an interior defensive lineman. And it looked pretty strong. For him, it reminds me of Levi Onwuzurike. When the Detroit Lions drafted him, you knew that eventually you're going to have to be patient with his development. And Detroit still took that risk. They took Levi in the second round and then made him a full-time starter this year, the last year of his contract. And he looked really good. And now he's going to probably land a big contract in free agency. So that's how I think Savion Jones, his early potential is going to be like that. He's going to need a team that gives him some time and patience, with the already established defensive line group to kind of rotate in with that group.
Yeah, he's one guy that just missed out on my top 10 at really at both positions, either edge or interior defensive line. For me, I've got Ty Robinson out of Nebraska as my number 9. I think he has one of the more explosive players at the position. Great first step, really good at using his hands both um, in the initial burst and in his counterplay. One of his main downfalls is he doesn't have too much of a pass rush plan, but he's just all power. He gets by the offensive lineman, great in the run game. I mean, this past season, he had 7 sacks, his most productive season so far. He's got tons of experience. This is his 5th year in college football. So he's a little bit older than some of the other guys. But I mean, at 6'6", 310, I mean, he is a massive player that could be an absolute problem in the backfield in the NFL. So I'm really excited about his potential as probably a day 2 kind of player.
Yeah, he's probably like my first off the list if we're not going to go like the deep honorable mentions that we'll get into later. But like the fringe one where he was right there is one
Yeah.
of the ones I wanted to put in, but just couldn't quite squeak in over, Joshua Farmer, Savion Jones. My number 8 is going to be Derek Harmon. I know a lot of people are going to have him higher. You might have him a little bit higher on your list out of Oregon. I think he's a gamer. I definitely do. On the defensive line, I love his instincts in the run game. He's very quick, very agile, but I just don't know if he has like true elite traits in terms of being one of the top guys that some people believe he can be. But after transferring out of Michigan State, he really came into his own, had 5 sacks this past year at Oregon, and helped that defense be a stout unit and get them on a deep playoff run with the Ducks there. But I just think elite traits aren't there, but he still showed on tape that he can be a guy that you can take a risk on.
Yeah. You're right. I do have him a little bit higher. Um, I completely agree. I think some people are putting him in that upper echelon of players, with the Kenneth Grants, with the Mason Grahams, with the, Walter Nolans, whoever you end up putting in that like top group. I don't think he's quite there. But I do have him a little bit higher. But at number 8, I do have his teammate, Jamari Caldwell out of Oregon. Another very interesting player that's kind of come on my radar just in the past couple weeks. Watched his tape. I think Derek is the better player, which is why I have him higher. But Caldwell's an absolute game changer in the run game. He's powerful. He just bulldozes centers when he goes up against them, pushes them straight back into the quarterback, creates disruption, pushes the pocket to allow some of the other pass rushers like a Derek Harmon to get some more production there. A little bit on the smaller size at 6'1", still 340 pounds. I think for me personally, he's all potential. He's got great frame. He's got good first step. He uses his hands well. Now it's about, all right, what can he do in the pass rush game at the next level in terms of production? He's going to be able to stop the run. He's going to be able to do that. But can he make it to that next level? I think he has the ability, and he's shown that in his progression from Michigan State. Sorry, not Michigan State. That's Derek Harmon. But through his 3 years in college football, he's shown his ability to improve each year. But this year, he took a step back in the pass rush production. He had 6.5 sacks in 2023. He didn't have a sack this year. But I think that's mostly because he kind of took second fiddle to Derek Harmon this year. So we'll see what happens. I think he's got the frame and he's got the abilities to be a top top interior rusher. But can he now move this to the NFL level? Not sure, which is why he's in this bottom half of my top 10.
Yeah, another one I did not have. So good pull.
All right.
Next one I have is Talik Williams
Okay.
out of Ohio State. I thought you know, I still put him up this high just because I think that there's still a lot of good that he can do with his movement and getting the best out of that part of his game. But I did think he was really inconsistent, and especially like not even game to game, but like in a single game against a lesser opponent, he would flat out dominate one rep and then get beat for like the next two. So I think that was an issue, and the arm length for him. We talked about arm length with the offensive line group and how it makes you a guard or a tackle, but for defensive tackles that are true defensive tackles, that is a major concern. especially when you're trying to use your hands and arms to your advantage and you go against offensive tackle or not offensive tackle, like offensive guards and interior offensive linemen. That's going to be a concern with him. We'll see if he gets that cleaned up, and maybe gets a better number reported at the combine. But I think that is one of his issues, but I do like the movement that he shows from the interior.
Yeah, I like Tyleik Williams. He's another guy that was kind of in my conversation for that 7 to 10 range, and he just missed out for me. He'd probably be my number 11 if I had a number 11 here. And pretty much exactly as you mentioned, I saw in when you're playing teams like Akron. I know that's one of the game film I watched on him. He dominated most of the game, but he still struggled. And then against bigger and better opponents, he really struggled. He didn't have as many highlights, in my opinion. And I think that's a little bit concerning for me. Um, he was overshadowed a little bit. We talked about the two edge rushers, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, for Ohio State last episode. And, maybe the production numbers could have been better if, they didn't have those guys. But, I like his movement, as you said. I like his frame. His arm length is a question mark, and that seems like it's just a pattern for this entire draft class is arm length. Um, but yeah, he just missed out for me on this top 10.
Yeah,
Uh,
but like I just want
yeah,
to add like the athleticism gives him a lot of high potential if you
yep.
can clean up the inconsistencies and the reps where he looked good, like he was
Look
popping up
good.
the
Yeah.
screen. Like yeah, he looked good. It's just then you go to the next play.
And
And that's what he has to work on.
and that's the tough thing I think with this position group is there's a lot of guys like that. You'll see them pop off the screen for 2 or 3 plays, and then the next 2 or 3 plays, it's like they get bottled up. And
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about this earlier. When we go to the combine in 2 weeks, and you've got 41 players there, those number 7 to 25, you guys are going to be fighting for those like day two selections. Arm
Hmm.
length is going to be key. The on field drills are going to be key. Just the interviews are going to be key that you go to. There could be a massive, massive difference in draft boards by the different teams based on those things. So
Definitely.
they're guys like Tyleek who, were inconsistent but show promise are going to need to show up in 2 weeks at the combine in order to kind of solidify themselves as that high day two pick. My number 7 is TJ Sanders out of South Carolina. Um, Another guy where, really 7 to 10, I could put them in any order, but I really like what I saw about him. 6'4, he's a little undersized weight wise at 290, but really explosive, good first step. He sheds blocks well, good in the run game. I think very similar to Tyleek is that he was a little inconsistent, not as inconsistent, which is why he's in my top 10. But for me, it's just getting off the line of scrimmage. That's my one downfall with him. But I think that's something that can be developed very easily. He had good production, 4 sacks in each of the past 2 seasons, also over 40 tackles, really good in the run game. So really promising player, good size, good explosiveness. It should have a ton of potential if put into the right situation.
Yeah, I had him at 6, and I agreed with pretty much everything you said. I think he's very lean for a defensive tackle,
Yep.
and I think the lack of production just came from how good South Carolina's defensive line was. A very underrated unit, and he still at times looked like one of the better players in that unit, but
Yep.
it definitely overshadowed it, what his production could be because the rest of their guys were so good. And that is good and bad in a sense because if he gets put on a bad defensive line in the NFL, is he going to be able to win when he is getting, a more aggressive look from an offensive line and from, the blocking protection, trying to, laser in on eliminating him in a given play. But I think the potential is evident with him. He has some issues with double teams and with the size, he's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But I do think that the potential would be there for him, and he kind of showed that at times at South Carolina.
Yeah, I think for him, it's all going to be about fit. I think if he gets into the right system with a team that's going to use him to his best abilities, he's going to be an absolute great player at the next level. But as you said, 6'4", 290 might not be everybody's ideal fit for what they're looking for in that position. So that could impact his draft stock and where it goes, but still a very, very solid player to look forward to at the next level.
Yeah, he's like I like him just because you can use him on like a third and long situation,
Yep,
especially early on, where it's you're not going to put your big guys where it's like a third and short, but you want to get a guy that can get after the quarterback, that's lean and explosive, fast, those kinds of things into the interior position. I think he can be really good in that role as an rotational guy early on.
100%. Now, now we get I kind of split mine into like three different tiers: my 7 to 10, my 4 to 6, and then my 1 to 3. That's kind of how I feel like this. And this guy, number 6, Darius Alexander out of Toledo. I I had him as high as 4 at one point. I really like him as a player. Good length, frame. His play recognition ability is really solid. Obviously, we saw that great pick 6 that he had this past season. Um, he's very versatile. He can do power rushes and finesse rushes. Um, for me, what kind of bumped him down a little bit is his get off. I think he's a little bit slow off the line of scrimmage. So against some better competition, he can struggle to get pressure on the quarterback because of that. Um, but other than that, he's a really solid player, really good at the line of scrimmage in terms of just getting in the quarterback's face, causing deflections, and just causing disruption in the backfield. So really solid player. Another really good player out of Toledo after Quinion Mitchell, corner went last year. So he's a guy that could potentially squeak into that first round conversation. Depending on how many of these guys end up going early, I think it's most likely going to be a round 2 selection for him, probably mid round 2. But depending on how the combine goes, how his interviews go, he's a guy that could be as high as number 4 of an interior defensive lineman list. So if he ends up kind of bumping himself up and getting into that 3-4 range, he could end up potentially making himself a round 1 player.
Yeah, I definitely think he's a really big sleeper at the position. I think a lot of people are finally catching on to him, which is good for him and his stock because at early on in the process, his rating wasn't that high at all at this position. I had him as my honorable mention number 1
Okay.
as a day 2 guy because I love the potential there. I think, like you were saying, the pass rush arsenal is incredible. Any move you can do against an offensive lineman, he did it and it looked good. And he wasn't just a bull rush guy, he wasn't just a finesse guy. He can do all. Just thought he needed to add more strength to his game, and that's an easy fix, especially once you get into a strength and conditioning room at NFL
Yeah.
level and
100%.
not the Toledo level.
Yeah.
You get him in a better weight room. I think he can be a very good player once everything clicks for him.
100%. All right, Cole. Who do you have at number 5?
All right, so to kick off my top 5, I just talked about Darius being a good sleeper of mine, but I think Aeneas Peebles is my favorite sleeper in the entire draft out of Virginia Tech. I think he possibly could be the best pass rusher out of all the players in this group. I mean, you look at the PFF numbers, the last 2 seasons, he led the FBS in a pass rush grade with a 92.2 over the last 2 years. He had 5 sacks last year. He had, took a step back with only 3 this year. But this guy, just anything you wanted to do with him, he could do it. He's shined during the bowl weekend. And the size, he's only 6'1", 290. It's going to prevent him from being an every down player, but he had a really good process so far, and I expect him to continue that and turn a lot more heads down at the combine.
Yeah, he's another guy that just missed out for me. It's amazing how good this interior defensive lineman class is because he was in my competition for that like 8 to 10 spot, and you've got him at number 5. It's there's going to be a lot of differing opinions on this class, but no, I really like Aeneas Peebles. We talked about his teammate at Virginia Tech last week in Antoine Power Roland at the
Hmm.
edge rusher position. That defensive front looked really, really solid, and it'll be interesting to see how high both of them go. Uh, Number 5 for me, another sleeper. We're really hitting on him. I got Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee. He's a guy that, again, it's really, really athletic. 6'3", 315. He's had decent production, 5.5, 4 sacks over the past 2 seasons. For me, he kind of popped off the screen just because of his ability off the line of scrimmage. He's extremely quick, one of the fastest first steps I've seen out of any player at this position. Extremely explosive. Um, great hand usage. He moves laterally really well. Uh, good, good, what's it called? Versatility in terms of pass rush moves when it's either power or finesse. So I really like him. I think the one thing he needs to do, it very similar to what you talked about, Darius Alexander, is he needs to add a little bit more mass, a little bit more muscle, get that strength, and pretty much what you explained there. As soon as he gets into an NFL workout regime, I mean, yes, he went to Tennessee, it's pretty good, but as soon as you get into an NFL weight room, that's going to add on pretty quickly. So I'm really high on Omar to be a top interior guy.
I mean, you stole another one of my sleeper honorable mentions I had. You took both of the guys that I was going to mention later on. I agree. His first step is absolutely incredible. The concerns with me, and also like real quick before I get to concerns, this guy played almost 1,000 career snaps
Yeah,
at Arizona State and Tennessee
talk about
combined.
experience.
Yeah, very experienced player. I mean, he was on the field and all the time, just never got off the field. 9.5 sacks over the last 2 years. But the issue with me, he's got to work on the discipline.
Yeah,
That's something that people are going to ask about once they start doing the interviews with him. He got suspended in 2023 for fighting, or ejected and then suspended for fighting, and then had 6 penalties last year. That is going to be a concern for some teams. I mean, that's the second most among defensive tackles, 6 penalties last year. There's only one player who had 7, and then a couple that were tied with 6. He was one of them. He's got to answer some of those discipline questions. But if he can do that, I mean, like we just talked about his traits, this guy can be really good.
yeah. When you talk about athletic ability, he's got everything you can ask for at the position. But as I mentioned, the combine's going to be huge. Those interviews are going to be huge for a lot of these guys. And for me, he's a top 5 player at the position. But if those interviews don't go well and they don't like what they see, they don't think he's going to be, they think he's still going to cause problems on and off the field. He could drop really quickly. So especially with the quality of this class, it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah. All right, so back to me for
Number 4.
4. My 4 is Kenneth Grant.
Okay.
That might be a surprise to you, but I think he still, as a pass rusher, is a little bit of a work in progress.
Yep.
There's a lot to like. There's a lot to build from. I mean, a lot of people are infatuated with some of his potential, and for good reason. He can dominate the run game. We've seen his effort chasing down players down the field, um, and anything he can do. His USC game was one of the best games that I studied out of anybody, and I think he is worth the investment. But I think, there's still some nuances in pass rush that he needs to work on. His arsenal of moves, I think he can definitely work on his bull rush as an interior defensive lineman. But I can see looking at it why they see him as, a first round talent.
Yeah, I completely agree. He's not my number 4. He'll come up in a little bit, but he was a guy where I think our number 1 is probably the same. I would assume, but
Yeah.
my 2 to 4, I had a really tough time kind of figuring out, who was 2, who was 3, who was 4. Kenneth Grant was kind of the last person that I was thinking about to potentially put 4, but my number 4 is Derek Harmon out of Oregon. Um, you know, as you mentioned, we already talked about him a little bit. For me, he's got good size. He's got good strength. He's got plenty of experience across 2 different programs. He uses his hands well. He's twitchy. I think for me, he doesn't finish consistently enough. And that can potentially be a problem. He had 5 sacks this past season, but before that, he had 3.5 the rest of his career. So I think his finishing ability is a little bit of a question mark. But in the run game, he's absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when he stripped the ball from Quinshawn Judkins behind the line of scrimmage in that game, he wasn't even trying to tackle him. He wasn't even trying. So he's really smart player, really instinctual. I think just finishing in the pass rush game is going to be the thing that holds him back potentially, which is why he's outside of that like upper tier that I was talking about, which is my top 3.
Yeah, and I mean the run game is ridiculous for Derek Harmon. I
Oh,
mean, there were times like it looked like he knew where the play was going
before
three
that,
steps
yeah,
3 steps before the offensive
yeah,
line, who knew what the play is, knew where they were going.
yeah,
It's his run instincts are unlike any I've ever seen from an interior defensive lineman. That's gonna definitely put him up there. But yeah, the lack of elite traits for me is what knocked him down the board. But I mean, a lot of people like him. I mean, I know Daniel Jeremiah had him in like the top 50
yeah.
on his big board and like pretty high up there too.
So it'll be interesting to see. I think for me, it's going to depend on situation. if he goes into a team like the Eagles or he goes to a team like the Ravens where they develop defensive linemen really well, he can have a ton of success. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of situation he gets into. But, he's got the tools in the run game. He just has to develop it in the pass game.
Yeah, definitely. So my number three, um, I'm not sure. You might have him left off your list if you haven't got to him yet. I'm gonna go with Dion Walker. I love my big boys, the buses. Get them in there and do not move that bus. He is a mammoth human being,
Oh, yeah.
6'6", 345. Like this guy is like Jordan Davis level, in my opinion. He's not quite as refined as a prospect as Jordan Davis was, but the size. I mean, if you got a gap eater like that can literally, with his size and strength, command two gaps in the run game, that's valuable. And teams need that. And you don't necessarily find that anywhere. And you're not going to get it from every single player either. So I think he also has an incredible bull rush, of course, with
Yep.
his size and with his strength,
Yeah.
what he can do. I thought it was weird. Kentucky sometimes put him out, put him as a stand-up edge, which is hilarious. Not where he needs to be, but it was whatever. I'm with it.
Yeah.
But he's not an explosive guy nor a consistent guy, but for what you know you're getting in him, it's okay. Like that's not what you want. You want a guy where situational football, if you're gonna stop a freaking tush push in the Super Bowl, you're putting Dion Walker on
Putting
the
Deion
field.
Walker in there. Exactly. Yeah. So for me, you're right. He just missed out for me. He's probably my 12th or 13th. And it's just the inconsistency for me. And that's it. I think, if he goes, if he goes pretty much exactly what I said with Derek Harmon, if he goes to a team that develops rushers really well, he's going to be elite. He's got the size, he's got the physicality, he's got the bull rush. Um, but I just haven't seen enough personally to have him in that top 10. He was in that conversation for that 7 to 10 range, as I mentioned. And, you know, 2 weeks from now, if we had this exact same conversation, he could be number 7 on my list, right? Because he was really, really close and he was in that conversation. But I just think the consistency levels of that 7, 8, 9, 10 were a little bit higher. And I think Tyleek was also a bit higher just in terms of his athletic ability for me. So, he just missed out. Insane prospect. I think, as I said, in 2 weeks, I could completely change my mind and he could be my number 7, 6, even 5. But yeah, just the inconsistency for me kept him off my list.
Well, you got to remember, there's only a very select few of 340 plus pound humans
Yep.
that can move and have his combination of size and strength. And
He's
you
he's one of
you
those.
got to value that. You're not gonna have a chance to get that kind of guy every year.
No. All right, my number 3, not going to talk about it too much because you already mentioned it. That's Kenneth Grant. It's pretty much the same reasons for you why it's not my top 2. His pass rush needs to be improved. I think there's a little bit of a lack there. But he's got great size, 6'3", 339, 340, good strength. I think the two things for me that need to be improved, the first one, he needs to be more explosive off the line of scrimmage. I think that leads to his ineffectiveness in the pass rush game, potentially. And then his range. I think he makes some decent plays, but he's not able to go and chase a quarterback, to the other side of the field like a Mason Graham can, because Mason Graham was outstanding at that throughout his entire college career. So I think he's still playing kind of second fiddle to Mason Graham, and I think that could hurt his draft stock. When you see two guys really good throughout the last few years playing for the same team, how much of Kenneth Grant's success was because of Mason Graham's success and Josiah Stewart, who we talked about last week, success. So I think that could potentially hurt him. But when you watch the film, you see he's got the talent, great in the run game, less to be desired for in the pass rush game, but plenty to work with. So I think he'll still go very high in this year's draft.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess that was your 3, right? So we
That
might
was
have
my
the
3.
same,
I'm
we might have
pretty
the
sure we
same
have
one
the
too.
same one too. So Cole,
Yeah.
you have it 2 and 1.
2 and 1. Okay, Walter Nolan's my 2.
Yeah.
I think he's very disruptive and explosive. I don't like what he did in the run defense compared to how he was as a pass rusher, but I think in the right scheme, he could be one of the better players in this draft and as a true pass rusher. I think the main thing with the run game is locating the football.
Yep.
And that could hurt him against some teams that do a lot of RPOs, that do a lot of option plays at the next level. You don't see it as much as you do in college in the NFL with those style of offenses. So that's kind of benefits him in a way. But he's going to be a first round guy for sure, just because of how much of a beast he can be rushing the passer from the interior. And then Mason Graham, number one, everyone has this. This guy's gonna be a top 10 pick. He's extremely consistent. He destroys blocks. He is one of the main leaders for one of the best teams and well-run teams in college football. And, like I think we talked about it. Jim Harbaugh, excuse me,
Yep.
would love to have a top 10 pick. And the Chargers just fell out of that range because he would love to add Mason Graham to that Chargers defensive line. And it's not going to happen, unfortunately. But the lateral quickness with this guy was incredible. The effort, incredible. The chase downs, everything about him just stands off on the tape as being right there as, one of the top 10 players in the draft.
Yeah. All right. Well, our 2 and 1 are the exact same. I had Walter Nolan at 2. Pretty much the same concerns. Run game was a little bit lacking. Elite pass rusher, great first step. He's explosive, good use of the hands. For me, he's very similar to TJ Sanders, and he's a little bit undersized in the weight category. Could potentially add some mass there. And very similar to what you were saying is I think he gets ahead of himself sometimes when he's rushing the passer, and he ends up missing out on the run where, he sees the open field, he sees the quarterback, and then he kind of just misses that they handed the ball off. And I think that's
Mhm.
one of the things that he suffers from. But I think with development, that could potentially improve. But as a pure pass rusher, absolutely outstanding. Mason Graham, my number one. He's the third best player in this class, in my opinion. Could potentially be higher. I don't know. He's a great player, but third best player. The only question for him is how many quarterbacks are getting selected in that top 5, because that's what's going to determine where he goes. I mean, is he going to the Patriots at 4? Is he going to the Jaguars at 5? Could he go to the Raiders at 6, the Jets at 7? There's going to be a lot of, he's got a lot of suitors. Pretty much anybody would love to have him. It's just going to depend. Where does Cam Ward go? Where does Shedeur Sanders go? Does Jackson Dart somehow get into the top 10 now that the Jets are looking for a quarterback? The Raiders are looking for a quarterback. The Browns are looking for a quarterback. The Giants, everybody's looking for a quarterback. So we could see some guys that maybe don't deserve a top 10 pick at this moment getting it. And that could end up pushing Mason Graham down the order. But I mean, I don't think there's any question he's a top 3 player in this draft. So
Yeah, and I will say for what I know, and last year I, was pretty spot on from what I heard that the Jaguars were getting Brian Thomas, and before the combine, it was well known like he was their guy, and they were even going to, try to trade up for him
yep.
to get Brian Thomas, and they're going to they're still doing second round GM interviews going into this week, and they're probably going to hire a GM 2 days before the combine, so it makes me think that maybe that GM is going to be just like Trent Baalke, where he's not really making a lot of the decisions in Jacksonville, and they let a lot of stuff get leaked out because of it. And yeah, Mason Graham is very high up on that board again this year for the Jaguars. So
Yeah.
he's gonna if he makes it out of that range,
Yeah.
in the top 3 or 4 picks, like the Jaguars are gonna be all over this guy.
I'm pretty sure we had him mocked to the Jags in our mock
Yeah,
draft. I mean, for me, it's all going to come down to what do the Patriots think as their best player on the board, because
yeah,
we all
that's their
think,
definitely biggest competition.
yeah, we all think Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter are going to be off the board. So the question is defensive line, corner, wide receiver, offensive tackle. What do you go with it for with the Patriots? If they don't go Mason Graham, even though he's best player available, then he's not making it past 5, in my opinion.
Yeah,
But all right, that was our top 10. I know we kind of took some of our honorable mentions, but we can just kind of mention them again. For me, I had Tyleik Williams, I had Anais Peebles, I had Dion Walker, and there was one more that I'm blanking on now, but pretty sure you had him in your list.
was it Savion?
Yeah, Savion. Savion was my 4th. So those are kind of
Yeah,
like my next 4 out. There are obviously a lot of other talented players at this position, but those are kind of the guys that I could see potentially over the next few weeks as we get closer and closer to the draft could potentially move up. as we get through interviews and combine and pro days and stuff like that. But those are kind
Right.
of my next four out.
Yeah. And then my two that you had mentioned and threw in there was Darius Alexander out of Toledo. For me, I think everything, once it clicks, will be really good for him. Just needs to add the size. And I think he's a fast rising prospect, as it seems the last couple of weeks. And then Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee. For me, like I said, it's the discipline, and the interviews go a long way with getting that last checkbox on him to make him a day two pick and a top player at this position. We'll see if he can get that answered at the combine.
All right. Well, that is our interior defensive lineman lists. Expect these to change a lot over the
Yeah.
next few weeks because this position, I mean, we've already talked about how important the interviews are. Arm length is going to be really important as well. But yeah, so next up, we are going to go into the receivers and corners. We're going to do our top sevens for each of those positions next episode. Then we've got our combine preview, our top five linebackers, tight ends, and safeties, the recap for the combine, the top 10 running backs, top 10 quarterbacks, and then we get into our big board.
There's
So
10 quarterbacks in this draft.
honestly, I was looking at my list. I actually left that open. I just have top blank quarterbacks. So we'll see. We might end up only doing five, depending on how this combine situation goes. But yeah, so that's up. Then we've got our big boards, mock draft 2.0, and then we'll go into our divisional overviews and see kind of what teams are thinking post free agency and stuff like that. So we're moving closer and closer to the draft. It's getting exciting, a lot of quality players, and we'll continue with our positional rankings next time with the corners and wide receivers.
Sounds good.
All right, see you guys next time. Bye.